Hi, and welcome to the Beacon House podcast. My name is Helen Townsend, and I work for Beacon House as their media and resources coordinator, therapeutic life story worker, and a peer supporter. As an adoptive parent, I'm intrigued by the many ways our multidisciplinary team support our clients.
Today, I'm talking to Dr. Laura France, clinical psychologist and our adult team lead. We'll be discussing mentalisation. What is it and what it looks like in therapy and at home.
I want to talk to you about mentalisation because it's something that comes up a lot, but I don't think people really understand what it is. So I want to understand it as a parent, not as a psychologist. I'm not a psychologist, but I want to. If you can, how would you explain it to parents or the layman?
Okay, so I love mentalisation as a concept, so I should declare that bias straight away. So I'm going to present these ideas very positively. But what I am really aware of, which I think tunes in with what you're saying, is that you can read a lot about mentalisation and what it is and how it's different from other related concepts. But I think in practice, it comes down to really quite a simple set of kind of fundamental ideas. So the main one being that there are parts of what makes us do the things that we do,
Right.
which are unseen and which we don't always pay adequate attention to. So the way that I normally describe it to a parent is with the iceberg analogy.
Okay.
So everything that you can see above the surface of the water, so how somebody behaves, how somebody interacts with you, what people say, what they do, how they move their body, how they position themselves, is observable. We can see that, we can hear it. And quite often we make a lot of very immediate judgments and assumptions based on just that.
Based on what we can see.
Based on what we can see. What mentalisation reminds us of, so mentalisation is an imaginative capacity which leads us to be curious about the parts that we can't see. So by that I mean what's beneath the surface of the water. So the thoughts that person is having, their emotional states, their desires, their urges. And mentalisation tells us that we need to be really curious about that and that we need to be careful not to make assumptions based upon what we can see above the surface.
So how does that, because that sounds obvious, but in reality, that is quite a skill.
Yes.
Because, and especially when perhaps you're parenting children or young people in whatever capacity, as an adopter, as a birth parent, as a foster carer, with challenging behaviour, to take the time to mentalise, is that a word?
Yes,
that the thing?
Absolutely.
To take that time in the moment when someone is portraying very challenging behaviour. I mean, is that a skill that needs to be practised? Or is it innate? Or how do you develop your mentalisation? Because that can, from my experience, that can be really tough.
So the thing that I find really hopeful about mentalisation is the kind of founding fathers of mentalisation theory, who are Peter Fonagy and Anthony Bateman. So what they would say is that everybody can mentalise.
Right.
That actually it's such a normal and natural part of how we develop as human beings.
Yeah.
And it happens so implicitly and automatically as we're developing that it's not the case that people can't mentalise. So we never talk about people who can and can't mentalise.
Right.
But what we might talk about is people who are more vulnerable to having mentalising failures.
Yeah.
So
So blocked from it.
Yeah. So in the scenario that you're describing, if you are faced with a situation that really, really triggers your own vulnerabilities, and most often what that means is vulnerabilities that you're carrying with you from your earliest care experiences.
Yeah.
So in mentalisation, we talk about those as attachment vulnerabilities. You know, something that's happened during your experience of attachment with your primary caregivers gets triggered in a situation, an attachment vulnerability, your buttons get pushed. And because of that, temporarily, you lose your capacity to mentalise.
In the moment you're being triggered.
In the moment that you're being triggered, yeah. So let me give an example. So if you are, and this is a client group that I work with quite a lot, if you're a mum who has experienced real adversity in her early years, and has been in an environment that's very unsafe, potentially has been really quite seriously harmed herself, may have been removed from the care of her biological parents, and is carrying what we understand now to be signs and symptoms of developmental trauma, which can then grow into a complex trauma picture for an adult mum. So if she's parenting a child with quite significant needs of their own, and that child, for example, has an episode where they're just screaming relentlessly, loudly, and perhaps even they're being aggressive and violent towards their parent. For that mum, what she's experiencing at that moment might be a really powerful trigger of harm that was caused to her when she was young, of the very unsafe environment that she was raised in. And so that's an attachment vulnerability for her. And so in that moment, she may very well lose her capacity to be really curious and interested about what's happening below the surface, and just get completely absorbed in what she can see and hear, and respond only to that.
Definitely. And I can identify that as an adoptive parent.
Yeah.
And so that's really, so even with a fairly structured upbringing, I can have blocked, I keep thinking it's blocked mentalisation, but that's not what you called it, is it? What did you call it?
Temporary failure.
Temporary failure. Is that something that can be worked through, or are you stuck with that?
So when we do mentalisation based interventions, one of the first things that we do is we help an adult to fully understand the meaning of attachment. We look in quite a lot of detail at their own attachment experiences, and doing that allows us to identify where their vulnerabilities might be. And that gives us a really good foundation for saying, okay, so these are specific situations in which you might get really triggered by your interaction with your child. And we do mentalisation based treatment with adults that have difficulties in their adult relationships as well.
It would make sense. It all translates no matter what relationship you're in.
So we identify the situations that might be really triggering, and then we think about how. So there's a range of strategies that we can practice about how that parent can hold on to their ability to mentalise, even in those very challenging circumstances. And actually, the first part of that, I think, often is just understanding and anticipating the situations that are really, really going to trigger you.
Acknowledging them, being aware that they are a trigger.
And being aware that there's a pattern, that it's not just random. So quite often mums say to me, I don't know what happened on that day. You know, he'd been really, really, or he or she had been really, really challenging all week, and I was fine. And then it was this particular day, and it wasn't a big thing, and I just totally couldn't cope. And part of mentalisation based treatment is identifying that actually that probably wasn't a coincidence. There was something about that specific situation that was so powerful for you
that it meant that you lost you had failure to mentalise in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's really interesting. So it's identifying the specific triggers.
Yeah.
To then be able to acknowledge they're there.
Yeah.
That would be kind of the initial start of it.
Yeah.
And then what would they move on to?
So so there's a few kind of key skills and strategies that we teach in mentalisation. So the first part of mentalisation-based treatment is quite educational. And once you've got a grip on those kind of key principles, then we practice them in therapy really intensively. So some of the key principles, for example, are having an understanding and appreciation that the mind is opaque and that you can't make an assessment or a judgment of what's happening for somebody based on the part of the iceberg above the surface, the part that you can see.
Okay, so when you say the mind is opaque, what does that mean in like baseline human, in my my limited capacity as a parent to understand? What do you mean by that?
So what I mean is that in any given situation, I cannot possibly know what you're thinking and feeling, just as you cannot possibly know what I'm thinking and feeling, unless we ask one another, unless we're curious.
Yeah.
So there's a nice example of this that I really like, comes from a brilliant book called Minding the Child.
Yeah.
And I use this example in all my training because it's an example of how we fail to appreciate that
very thing
in our children. So there's an example that says that there's a young girl, she's the daughter of a doctor,
right,
and she's playing with her mum's doctor's bag, and she gets out the stethoscope and she puts the earpieces in her ear, and then she's kind of playing with the other end of the stethoscope, and her mum's looking at her and thinking, oh my goodness, look, you know, she's imitating me. She wants to be just like mummy. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up. And then the child puts the end of the stethoscope to her mouth and she says, welcome to McDonald's. Can I please take your order?
Oh, brilliant. Oh, no.
And so we do this all the time with our kids, is we watch what they're doing and we make all sorts of assumptions which are based entirely on what's in our minds about what they're doing, when actually what we need to do is be really, really curious, you know, about, and of course none of us can do that all the time. No. None of us can be completely switched on in that way all the time.
Oh, it would be exhausting.
It would be completely exhausting. But I'd say that probably the most important times when we need to be curious about what's going on for someone are the times when we tend to get so triggered ourselves that we fail to be able to do it. Yeah. So one of the things, one of the strategies that we'd be teaching is, okay, in those most difficult moments, is it possible to just be curious? Is it possible to take a breath and just be curious? And as much as possible, ask questions. What's going on for you? Yeah. Let me know what's happening for you. You know, rather than react and doing that narration that we often do for children. So we quite often say, look, you're really upset because you're really tired and you're cross with mummy. Yeah. And sometimes we'll be right about that. But there all equally might be times when that's not what's going on at all.
And when it's not what's going on, we then can exacerbate it by getting it wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a painful experience for us as well, because we might be trying to respond based upon a whole set of assumptions that are not right. Yeah. So then we as parents have an experience of failure and of not getting it right, not providing the correct response, when it could be that that's because we just actually haven't been curious about what's really happening.
Yeah. And can that then fuel into a cycle of we get it wrong, the child gets more wound up, we feel more hopeless, and the mentalisation failure occurs. I suppose I'm thinking of blocked care when you are, and that must be, I would have thought blocked care, within blocked care, mentalisation failure must happen so much more frequently. It definitely, in my experience of, as you're talking, I'm kind of reflecting back and thinking, I had so many breakdowns of not getting and I didn't have the capacity to be curious. Yeah. So could it fuel itself almost?
Absolutely. And one of the things that we know is that mums and dads who are pretty good mentalisers, who have kind of fairly few mentalisation failures raise children who also have good mentalising capacity.
Yeah.
So that's another way in which it can become a bit of a cycle, is that, you know, during a child's development, they will be learning how to mentalise through their interactions with us.
Yeah.
And it may be, so in that scenario that I described where you have a child who is really dysregulated, really upset, really distressed, if we say, if we give a response that's not right, if we fail to be curious and we make an assumption and we say, you're just really cross because you couldn't have that toy, what the child learns from that interaction is, well, that's been named now as a cross feeling. That doesn't feel completely right for me, but also I've got a very, very young brain, and I'm going to take that message. I'm going to take that guidance from my parents. So this must be cross. When actually it might not be. So we sometimes name our children's emotions for them incorrectly, and leave them with a sense of, well, that doesn't feel quite right, but it must be, because that's what mum or dad says it is. If you're a really curious parent and you're asking lots of questions about what's happening, what's going on for you, could it be this? Could it be that? When did you start feeling like this? Then what we're helping that child to do is learn to mentalise. We're helping them to explore, okay, below the surface, there are all these thoughts and feelings and sensations that are making me do this. And now mum or dad is helping me figure out what exactly it is.
Yeah. So if you are, because listening to that sounds like a lot of stuff in that moment for the parent to be doing.
Yeah.
Is some of it silent mentalisation?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's not always spoken out loud. And then can you be reflective in your own curiosity? What am I saying? So later, so in that moment, you're not sure what's going on, but it's not quite appropriate to be talking at that moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it makes things worse. Can you be curiously mentalising, how do you say it? Mentalising silently, and then reflecting, and then go back to the child and go, I wonder what's going on in that. Does that still apply?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I see it is, if we think about our kind of standard process with a really dysregulated child, is regulate first. Yeah, so calm them, soothe them, get them back into a regulated state emotionally and behaviourally. Then relate to your child, so whatever that needs to be, holding them, doing some reparation if it feels like you've had a bit of a cross moment with each other, connecting. And then only when those things have been achieved can we reason with our children.
Yeah. And the mentalisation can occur then, so it's not necessarily in the moment.
Yeah, the mentalisation for the child can occur in the relating phase.
Right.
But I think what's really important for particularly, so, and I'm saying mums because primarily the cohort that I work with tend to be young mums who have their own trauma histories. That concept of silent mentalisation, I've never used those words, but I will now, is really important, because there can be urgency to intervene.
Yes, and I think
the moment
that happens a lot.
It's so natural. Your child appears distressed, and you want to get in there and do something,
and fix it, or stop it.
It's fix it or stop it.
Yeah,
right, exactly. But there's a risk that we might make an assumption about what the need is and respond incorrectly in the moment, which will feel really unsatisfactory for the child and for the mum, because you then get an experience of having failed and having not done the right thing. Yeah. Whereas actually it's not the child's failure, it's not the parent's failure either. Yeah. It's both of those people in that moment are having a temporary failure to mentalise. Yeah. So what's absolutely much better to do is to just soothe and regulate and not try to intervene and not try to reflect. That, you know, the important thing, I think, the mantra that I ask most parents to have is that I don't need to know what this is about right now. I just need to regulate, I just need to
Yeah.
soothe, you can start to get those really powerful feelings of, oh, I'm just not getting this right.
Yes,
No,
yes, definitely.
I'm failing. I'm just not. And once that narrative starts up in your head, then you will be in a place where you can't mentalise.
So, though, what you just said there is really familiar. That's definitely when I was really poorly with blocked care and PTSD. That mantra was in my head was, I'm not good enough. I'm not getting this right. I'm failing all the time. Is that linked to that failure to mentalise then?
Yeah, I think so.
Because it would make sense,
yes,
totally to me.
Yeah.
Ah.
I think so. I think in those moments where your child appears really, really distressed and they are not in a regulated enough state for you to sit and be curious with them about, gosh, what was happening? When did you start to feel like that? Did something happen in your body? You know, when did you start to feel upset? Do you know what that's about? When before you're able to do that, in that moment of real dysregulation that feels like such a crisis, you are making all sorts of assumptions about why your child is behaving in that way.
Yeah.
And for a lot of mums and dads who have their own trauma histories, I'm saying that actually, but we all have our attachment vulnerabilities.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So actually you don't need to have, the example I used earlier, I think I chose because it just makes the link really clear. But actually you don't have to have had trauma in your early years. It could just be that what is happening really pushes one of your vulnerabilities. And so the danger is that in that moment, if you're making an interpretation about why your child is behaving in that way, it's most likely that your interpretation is going to be about you and how you're failing and how you're getting it wrong.
Yeah. But I can totally connect with that.
Yeah.
And that would link up with how I experienced it.
And that's a really dangerous assumption for and a really dangerous narrative to get inside the mind of a parent. Yeah. Because in actual fact, it might be that it's absolutely nothing to do with your parenting. It's just a very normal moment of dysregulation for that child.
But you can then get caught in this massive spiral and exacerbate it. And actually none of that is really happening.
And once you get really preoccupied then with what is it about me, what have I done wrong, how am I failing, then your ability to be curious with your child is going to be really significantly limited by that.
So within therapy, because in a minute I'd like to ask about how it could apply outside of therapy. How could parents apply this idea, actively apply this idea if they are feeling like they're experiencing mentalising failures? So the parent that you've worked with has done this exploring of self and started to practice it within the therapy. What's the next stage? How do they get to kind of, is that halfway through? Is that the end bit? How do they get to the kind of ultimate ending of their therapy in mentalising?
So one of the ways, so at the moment, certainly at Beacon House, we use mentalisation based treatment individually with individual parents at the moment. After the introductory phase, within a kind of classic mentalisation model, and something which we'd really like to move on to, is that you then become part of a mentalisation based treatment group.
Ah, that would make sense.
And so what you start to do is you start to being in a group with other people who share similar difficulties, I think makes the treatment so much more powerful.
Why do you think that? What is it about the group dynamics?
Well, so I think you go from having a therapist to potentially having 10 therapists.
And with the right facilitator, it can be positive rather than negative, because I'm just thinking sometimes you can get a group of people with similar experiences in a room and it can become quite toxic. So it would need to be facilitated. Yeah,
so mentalisation based treatment groups are usually facilitated by 2 facilitators. And at any one time, one facilitator will have responsibility for managing the content, managing where the discussion's going, and the other facilitator will have responsibility for managing the well-being of the group members. in my experience, MBT groups are incredibly powerful and warm places to be.
Yeah.
And that's certainly where I would like to move.
I can see the power in it, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. But you were talking about kind of next stages, and I think there's something about you needing to experience mentalisation in action.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. So what does that look like?
So one of the things that we quite commonly do here is that we will run an individual adult having mentalisation-based treatment on their own, alongside that adult having video interaction guidance sessions with their child.
Okay.
And we found that just works perfectly, because in video interaction guidance, just really, really briefly for people that are not familiar with that, what happens is you interact with your child in the way that you would always interact with them. Yeah. You are present in a therapy room with a therapist, and you just play and interact.
No things are set up. You're just
tasks, no rules. You just be with your child.
Okay.
And then what your VIG therapist does is, so you're videoed, so that makes it a little bit difficult to say just do what you normally do while you're being filmed, but most people can kind of get used to that over time. They eventually forget that the video's there, and then your VIG therapist will go through the video and choose the moments where you are at your most attuned.
Okay.
And actually those are the moments when you are at your best mentalising.
Okay. Yeah, so mentalising in action.
Mentalising in
action. And
they
can see it.
And you see it. Yeah. You see it and you notice.
Yeah. And being able to view it as a third party almost. So when you're being it played back, I've experienced that in sensory attachment integration. Watching the video back as a third party makes it somehow more believable. Yes. And I don't know why, but there's definitely a power in someone going, look, notice this.
Yes.
And I can see why that would be so helpful.
I think if you're feeling really underconfident and really kind of beaten down, then if somebody tells you that you did something well, you can really easily discount that quickly.
Oh, yeah, especially, that negative voice is very loud.
Yeah, it was just luck, or they're telling me, they're trying to make me feel okay about myself, they're telling me it was better than it was. But when somebody shows you a video clip and you can see how brilliantly you're connected to your child, you can't really argue with that.
No, I can see that being really powerful. Okay. So if you are not a parent who has access to MBT, but is that what it's called, MBT?
MBT, yeah.
But you feel like you are experiencing failure to mentalise, which I think naturally everyone does anyway.
Absolutely.
In short little blips.
Absolutely.
But if you feel like it's something that's happening more and more, what could people do in their day-to-day lives? Is it just noticing more, or what? Where would you kind of briefly advise people where to go with it?
If you're not a parent, or if you're a parent but not in therapy,
if you haven't got access to Beacon House, what does that mean?
So I think what it means is that you have your key rules in your head. So the key rule is I can't absolutely know what's happening under the surface by what I can see above the surface. Yeah. I need to always be curious. Yeah. I need to be aware that I may sometimes lose my capacity to mentalise temporarily, and that's completely normal. And okay. And in those moments, I need to not act. I need to wait until I feel like I've regained that capacity. Yeah. And I think that there is a way that you can identify patterns. I think often having a bit of an agreement between either yourself and your partner, or if you're a single parent, between yourself and a good friend, or an aunt or a godparent, someone who's around you a lot when you're parenting, to kind of have an agreement of, can you just notice when are the particular times that I seem to really struggle? Yeah. Almost keeping a log for yourself over time of when are the moments that this is happening for me. Yeah. And realising, almost having a kind of practising the ability to say, okay, this is a red flag moment for me, and I need to wait before I react. Yeah. There's an amazing book, which there are two books actually, which I really, really like. One's called Minding the Child, which I think is without a doubt the best mentalisation book when it comes to children and families mentalising.
Is it easy to read, or is it?
I'd say Minding the Child is so it's probably directed more at health and social care professionals, but I actually think it's really accessible.
Okay, yeah.
Particularly the early chapters introducing mentalisation and talking about what it looks like in real life, I think are really accessible.
Okay.
And then there is another one which is written specifically for parents called Reflective Parenting.
Okay. And that is based on mentalisation?
That's, mentalisation is the kind of core concept underneath that book.
And what about, I was just wondering then, if your child is old enough or developmentally mature enough to have the conversation with you and to understand the concept, could in a calm moment you talk to your child about mentalisation and say, sometimes I'm going to get it wrong, and if I get it wrong, could we come up with a code or a mum, dad, you're having a break, you're having a mentalisation failure. I'm sure you wouldn't use those words, but is that something that could, or is that too?
I use mentalisation with adolescents all the time. Adolescents, this is a sweeping statement, but what I notice in a lot of the adolescents that I work with, particularly adolescents who are really angry a lot of the time, is that 9 times out of 10, they're angry because they've had a mentalisation failure.
What, received one or having... They are having one.
Experiencing one, although it's entirely likely that the person they're interacting with is also experiencing one.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
If it's an angry
sense.
moment.
Yeah.
But I'll give you an example of like a classic mentalisation failure. And this is something that is it's got a fancy name in mentalisation. It's called cyclic equivalence.
Oh, that is fancy. Okay.
So it's a name for one of the ways that our mentalisation capacities can fail.
Okay.
And basically it means that what seems true to me in my head absolutely is the way it is in the world. Yeah.
So affect, do some people call that affect? Or
so affect is more a kind of term for emotion.
Okay.
Whereas this is more about a faulty assumption that the way it is in my head is the way I'm experiencing this is the way it is. So quite often, if I'm reflecting on a kind of angry moment with an adolescent, I'll say, what's happening for you in that moment? And they may say something like, well, they're all taking the piss out of me. They all think I'm a mug. And so my response to that will always be, okay, and what happens for you when you think that, when you feel, well, it makes me really angry. Well, of course it does. Yeah. But my question is, how do you know that they all think you're a mug? Yeah. Well, because I do. I can just tell. How? Yeah. So that's the kind of classic mentalisation failure. And I think that happens between adolescents and their parents as well, that you're just trying to control my life. Yeah. Okay, well, that's an assumption of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Yeah. That's your best guess. But how do you know you're getting it right?
And of course, without sitting down and being curious, when everyone is calm, that can just spiral, because the parent will maybe become more controlling to try and manage the situation, or having, I suppose, not more controlling, but having that mentalisation failure. Can't say mentalising, and then it just spirals.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in those moments, you're just trying to control me, or you don't want me to have any fun. In a calm and regulated moment, you can really encourage your adolescent child to mentalise by saying, can you think of any other reasons why I might want you in by 10 o'clock? Yeah. Like, you're making your best guess that it's because I want to control you. Yeah. But you can't possibly know that, because you can't see inside my mind, and I can't see inside your mind. No. Yeah. So let's both of us ask each other what's inside the other's mind. So are there any other reasons why?
I might. And I suppose if you did that with, I suppose I'm thinking about never having kind of an end goal, not having an agenda within that conversation, not trying to make the child see your point of view, but just just purely considering what's going on for each other, actually is that maybe is quite effective problem solving, because you're not looking to focus on a resolvement. You're just going, we're both clearly thinking different things here. Let's be curious about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I really like about mentalisation is that you always share a problem. So it never becomes the child's problem, and it never becomes your problem. No one has to own the problem.
Yeah. It's never a fault. That's what
There's no fault.
Yeah, that comes up a lot. And I actually think, I'm not sure we need fault, actually, in this.
No, I mean, in MBT, you would share it as a dilemma. So, okay, so we've got a bit of a dilemma here, because you really want to be out past 10 o'clock. I really don't feel safe with you being out past 10 o'clock. We don't completely agree on the reasons, so how are we going to resolve this together, you and me?
Yeah. But I suppose I'm thinking with inflammatory situations like that, because I think some of them are, I could see the usefulness in approaching it with curiosity rather than the purpose of resolvement. Obviously, that would be love. That is what you're really looking for.
Yeah.
But I could see it being a safer, more constructive way of approaching it, just by exploring it rather than looking to fix it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. And I think we've got to be realistic, because I'm describing these conversations as if that's how it would happen.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. These lovely plastic people.
These lovely conversations where we all sit down and we mentalise together and no one's angry.
Yeah.
I'm doing it for the purpose of clarity, but I think that often we will just have to accept that there will be certain situations where we have to pull rank as the adult.
Yeah.
There is a reason that children and young people and adolescents have limitations around what they're legally allowed to do, for example, and it's because we know that their ability to inhibit kind of dangerous or reckless choices is not fully developed until they're adults. So sometimes we do need to step in and place a limit around their behaviour, because we need to do that to keep them safe.
Yeah.
But I think there's, and that's always going to be difficult. Adolescents, young people are always going to struggle when we place limits around them. But I think there's real power in modelling mentalisation as you do that.
Yeah.
So I hear you that this is really frustrating and upsetting. I don't want to be in conflict with you, but I have to keep you safe.
Yeah.
You know those comments that you quite often hear, why? Because I'm the adult.
Yeah.
Because I'm in charge.
Yeah.
Because I said so.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that doesn't tell your young person anything about what's going on in your mind.
No.
So it gives that gives them plenty of ammunition to be really cross with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's and even if you get a kind of grumpy response to saying, look, I just need to keep you safe because I love you very much.
Yeah.
And I can imagine lots of adolescents going,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, are you?
Fine. Yeah.
But you have to, I think, trust that there's a message going in there that's less about, there's no rationale for this. I'm just being a really boring adult. You have to hope that there's a message going in that's about, this is coming from a place of love.
Yeah. Definitely. Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.